if you're joining us, please feel free to let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from today, what's in your glass if you're on the East Coast or you're just starting early like us. And we'll give everyone a few more moments to sign in. Seen a bunch of people tuning in for all 3 sessions today. That is awesome. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to preview week for Willamette, the Pinot Noir auction. The 2019 Willamette Valley wines featured in this tasting series are exclusive small lot bottlings for our wine trade auction. If you don't know about the auction and you'd like to learn more about how to purchase these wines, you can contact Emily at the WVWA and I'll drop her address in the chat. I want to take a moment to thank all of our auction sponsors for their ongoing support. And a very special thank you to our Imperial sponsor, Belle. And now I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. Representing lot number 8, Brian O'Donnell of Belle Pente. Representing lot number 9, Russell Gladhart of Winters Hill. Representing lot 10, Mike McNally of Fairsing Vineyard. Representing lot 11, Josh Bergström of Bergström Wines. And representing lot 12, Joe Wright of Left Coast Estate. And I'll kick it off now to our moderator, Ian Burch of Archery Summit.
Thank you, Julia. And thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun. And thank you all for tuning in virtually to Willamette, the Pinot Noir auction. We look forward to seeing you in person on August 5th. And a big thank you to everyone who reached out for samples and who are able to taste along with us today. We can't thank you enough for supporting our auction by buying these unique winery donated auction lots. It allows the Willamette Valley Wineries Association to hire full-time staff, helps the industry through good times and bad, and also educates the world about just how special the Willamette Valley is. Today, I have the opportunity to moderate this group of business owners, winemakers, some both, who have all have awesome 2019 Pinot Noir auction wine to offer. To start, I'd like to just kind of introduce you to each person. And I'd love for you guys to let me know a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your brand, and of course, please talk about your wonderful auction lot. And in no particular order, I'm going to start with lot number 8 with Belle Pente, Mr. Brian O'Donnell.
That's not fair. We talked about this. I'm not supposed to go first. Anyway, I'm for those of you who don't know me, I'm Brian O'Donnell, owner winemaker at Belle Pente. I'm not a native Oregonian. I grew up in New York City, moved west after college in the late 70s, made wine as a hobby in my garage and basement in San Francisco and the Bay Area until the hobby got out of control in the late 80s. And in 1992, my wife and I traded our little bungalow in San Jose, California for this old 70-acre farm and started Belle Pente. Planted the first vineyard in 94, built the first winery in 96. So this will, not first vintage in 96. So this will actually be our 26th harvest this year.
Fantastic. Brian, would you mind letting us know how you put your blend together for the auction and how it's different from the other wines that you guys make?
Yeah, so this wine comes from the original block that we planted in 1994. So this was the first. It was like a 1.5 acre experimental lot with 5 different varietals that we subsequently grafted mostly to Pinot. And the name of the lot is Jeremiah's Judgment. So the person that the wagon train family that originally settled this property was Jeremiah Rowland, and he got here about 150 years before we did. Now, Jeremiah obviously had no intention of growing Pinot Noir, but he picked a pretty good spot for Pinot. And Jeremiah's Judgment is reflection of that judgment that didn't even know we had, selecting a great place to grow Pinot Noir. So the wine that we're offering is called Jeremiah's Judgment. It's the first wine we've made in over 20 years that's exclusively from that original 1994 planting. So 25-year-old vines. We usually get 6 barrels. This goes into our estate reserve, which is our top cuvee. So this is kind of an uber estate reserve, if you will. It's all from 1 barrel, the best barrel of the best part of the vineyard.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I can't wait to try it. All right. So next up here, I'm going to have Mike McNally from Fairsing Vineyard. This is lot number 10. I'd love to hear a little bit about you, a little bit about your brand, and what makes your auction lot so special.
Thank you, Ian, and thanks everyone for attending this webinar today. I'm Mike McNally. My wife and I own Ferguson Vineyard. We spent too much time in big cities and working for big corporations. Decided about 15 years ago to come out here. It's actually my wife's initiative. She had been taking viticulture and enology courses in the large city that we were residing in. And she said she loved Oregon, wanted to come out here and grow grapes. I came along and we've been having fun ever since. The wine itself, we're referring to as the matriarch's dream. The top end wines that we do at Fairsing Vineyard are all called matriarchs. They're named after our mothers and our grandmothers. We do 4 matriarch Pinot Noirs and 1 matriarch Chardonnay. And the matriarch dream is the dream of all those other matriarchs. Fairsing itself is a Celtic name for bountiful. Our core values are family, heritage, earth, our sustainability, and smile. We want people to drink the wine at special occasions and enjoy themselves. You know, the vineyard itself is in the Yamhill Carlton AVA. The soils out here eroded from marine sedimentary rock. The soils are very well drained and they have great water holding capacity. The wine itself is from 2 of our favorite blocks and the best barrels from those 2 blocks. One is a 777 Dijon 777 block. It's about 40% from that block. And 55% of the barrel that we put together was from a Dijon 114 block. The 777 in our vineyard tends to provide light fruit in the front palate, and the 114 envelops the side and the mid palates. We added a touch of Dijon 115 to complete the back polish and finish the wine off. You know, the wine compared to our past auction lots is a matriarch. It's a beautiful feminine wine, but it has strength and sustainability. The production techniques, it was fully destemmed, fermented in 2-ton fermenters, gently extracted, peak temperatures 80 degrees. We, after about 10 months of primary aging, we took and put together 1 barrel in a mercury barrel, a once-used mercury barrel, and combined it together and let it age an additional 5 months to integrate everything. And that's what this 5-case lot comes from. And in a few minutes, Ian, I'd like to taste it with everybody.
All right, sounds like a plan to me. Thanks for the description. It's great. You sound like a winemaker when you talk. It's awesome. I've been trying to think of questions that aren't too like geeky winemaker, but I think I might throw a couple at the group today because you definitely have a way of talking about your wine, Mike. All right, so next up we've got Mr. Josh Bergström from Bergström Wines, lot number 11. Josh, I'd love to hear, a little bit about you and, what Bergström is up to these days and what makes your auction lot different from the rest of the Bergström wines. And you're muted.
You'd think after 16 months of this, I would have figured it out. First off, it's great to see Mike and Joe and Russell and Brian. Man, it's good to see your faces. And and we're thrilled to be part of this group and talking about our wine. I think that, if I'm going to talk about who Bergström is real quick, I have to talk with my father who founded the winery. And my dad's a Swedish immigrant, grew up in northern Sweden in a agricultural town, and, lived in a communal household, no indoor plumbing, no electricity, no cotton clothing type scenario. Cross-country skied to school uphill both ways. And I've been there. There's actually a downhill. My dad grew up in an agricultural community where they hunted moose, they fished, they planted potatoes. His education was cut short at 12 years old, and then he had to take out a lease to buy his first axe and saw to be a logger. And this is like one of many stories of our parents' generations, but when he got on a boat in Oslo, Norway, and took a steamer across the Atlantic to New York Harbor, and then flew directly to Portland, Oregon, where he went to Cleveland High School here. Day one, didn't speak English, graduated student body president, then went to Willamette University, also graduated student body president, and then went on to become an OBGYN surgeon. He laid this kind of impossible plan down that most of me and my siblings have been trying to replicate the rest of our lives. But my dad is, I always like to say, one of the greatest winemakers I ever worked for, who never made a drop of wine in his life, because for him it was always about quality and story and authenticity. And my dad called me one day when he moved out to Dundee in 1996, and he said, do you want to plant a vineyard together? And I said yes. I mean, I was a business student. I was an entrepreneurial kid. I had my own landscaping company growing up in high school, and I didn't know what I wanted to be. I was trying to make beer, but I made pretty bad beer. And we started this family journey, and I think that my dad's story for me and for Bergström Wines is at the center of it, because it allowed me to move to Burgundy, France, and study viticulture and enology as a postgraduate student. And it allowed me to, unlike previous generations, back in the early days of wine, I think winemaking was a hobby for wealthier people. And then in the 70s and 80s, all of a sudden people started getting interested at a younger age. And then in the 90s, we could actually go to school and learn about winemaking and actually enter this trade in our early 20s. And that's what I did. I started making wine when I was 21 years old, and I've been doing it ever since. And so the Bergström story is really about, we're Portland natives, but first generations here, and really trying to live up to my father's successful immigrant American dream story, and really just trying to make the best of what we can do and hope to pass it on to the next generation. So our lot, which I believe is lot 11, is called the Little Giant. And this comes from one of our earliest planted vineyards. That's a 5-case lot that epitomizes the Bergström style as it has evolved over the last 25 years of winemaking. To really, nowadays, I really want to focus on the savory, the umami, the saline, the salty characteristics, that whole cluster fermentation and earlier harvesting than I used to do really brings us kind of this focus on natural acidity and lower alcohols, which I think the Willamette Valley is perfectly conducive for, and a smaller usage of Burgundy and cooperage. So we're now using about less than 10% annually. This comes from the Winery Block Vineyard, which is the smallest of our 5 estates, and in a good year will give us 10 barrels of wine, and in a challenging year would give us maybe like 5 barrels of wine. It's just under 2 acres of land, and the reason I kind of mention my time in Burgundy with Caroline, my wife, is that when we came back, we planted this vineyard meter by meter. So this is 10,000 vines per hectare. This is classic Burgundian planting, but we never purchased an Enjambeur tractor. So we realized the hard way that we had to farm this by hand. And so it's really been kind of one of the most backbreaking, difficult vineyards we've farmed in our entire career. We do everything by hand. So it's hand hoeing, hand weed whacking, mowing, tilling, hand hedging, and motorized backpack sprayer. So very difficult. But because of this backbreaking work and this kind of everyday love we give this vineyard, the wines are probably the most dramatic, probably the most impressive, probably the largest scale at lower alcohol wines that we make. This wine is 12.8% alcohol, but with that whole cluster fermentation, a really amazing spicy expression. I feel that here on these soils, which are 60 million years old, we have 15 feet of sand on top of sandstone, and the percentage of sand is about 85%. So extremely sandy, very stressful on the vines. Very spicy profile. I always get in this wine a black tea, salted black licorice, sweet baking spice profile. The Chehalem Mountains, especially on the Calkins Lane bench where we are, can go to cola, root beer, sassafras pretty quickly if we don't harvest early enough to have the acidity to lift it up a little bit. And so I find that harvesting this a little bit earlier and then having that whole cluster retention adds the integrity and the structure to give a savory herb profile and spice profile to kind of help lift up an appellation that is otherwise quite brown spiced, not in an unpleasant way, actually in a nice way. And I would just finish on saying that, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the other guys have to say, but I think the 2019 for me is one of my favorite vintages of my career. It's high in acid, low in alcohol, extremely succulent and savory and bright and fresh and salty, a lot of saline flavors and textures. I think it's an Oregon classic in the making. And I know that when Brian started Belle Pente back in '96, and when we started Bergström in '99, and Russ and Joe, I can't remember when your first vintages were, but they were a while ago. You know, starting off with those leaner, harder vintages, I think was wonderful because it really shaped our appreciation of these classics, that they weren't easy, but they will prove to be great in the long term.
Fantastic. Thanks for the history too. I always love these opportunities, like these events here, OPC, IPNC. You really get a huge sense of your peers. You hear stories here and there, and it's lovely to hear in such detail where everybody's from and what really truly goes into these wines. This is a fantastic opportunity. All right, we're going to move on here. So Russell Gladhart from Winters Hill Estate. This is lot number 9. Russ, it'd be great to hear about you and what you guys are up to at Winters Hill, and of course your auction lot.
Absolutely. Well, thanks to all of you being here with us today. It's a fun event. I'm lucky enough to be sitting in my backyard today, away from the noise at the winery. So pleasure for me to be here. So Winters Hill Estate is really a kind of classic Oregon family winery. I've been partners with my parents since 2004, but I've really been working with them on and off since 1990 when they planted our first vines. And our story actually goes back one more generation. My grandparents purchased the land that we farmed back in 1961, and their name was Winter. And so that's where the name of our business comes from. John and Lena Winter immigrated from Germany and then moved out to Oregon in 1961. So it's a pleasure and an honor for me to kind of get to carry that on. And now my daughter has started washing dishes at the tasting room on weekends. So we're bringing it forward again. So we grow our vines here in the Dundee Hills. We're 100% estate. So everything we make comes from those vines that we farm. Like some other folks have described, this wine is kind of a triple selection of our very best blocks. So I like to think of our winemaking as kind of a meritocracy. So we ferment each block and it's a separate small fermenter. We give every single fermenter the same TLC and the same love and care to try to get sort of maximum quality and richness and sort of sense of where it came from. But it depends on the year. Certain blocks will really kind of rise up and be exceptional in one year, and then maybe not quite as good in another year. And so as a winemaker, we really have to keep an open mind and say, you know, which one is the best this year, or not the best, but among the best. And so we'll pick 2 to 4 of those blocks to make some really small quantity, our single block wines that mostly go to our wine club members. And then this wine, our auction lot, is a selection from those single blocks that we've pulled from those blocks to make a kind of unique blend for this wine in particular. We call it the Heartland because it really is from the heart of our vineyard. And it also, what we spell Heartland, H-A-R-T, because our name Gladhart is spelled H-A-R-T. So it's both from our heart, from our family, and also from the heart of our vineyard. So I'm really proud of this wine and excited to taste it with everyone, both here and then in person in a couple of weeks. You know, echoing a little bit of what Josh was talking about, our harvest in 2019 was a little bit early. We harvested the fruit for these wines on September 27th and 28th. It's not too common over my career that we've finished harvesting our Pinot Noir before the end of September, but that was the case in this year. And we really are getting more and more focused. You know, when I look back at how my dad and I used to discuss the vintage and the season, we were really trying to manage our vineyard to kind of get the fruit ripe a little bit earlier. Now with changes in the climate and changes in the style of wine that we want to make, we're really looking at, okay, how do we slow things down? How do we slow down development of the fruit so that we get maximum flavor and our optimum flavor? And so we're not looking for maximum ripeness, we're looking for optimum ripeness. And so for us, that is at a slightly lower alcohol level. This is 12.7% alcohol. And our location, we're kind of on the western slope of the Dundee Hills. We just naturally really maintain the acidity in the fruit. We're really kind of blessed by that wind that comes in off the ocean. And so we're able to get what I call optimum ripeness and maintain that acidity and really give you a lot of length and balance to the wines. So that's a little bit about me, and I look forward to discussing the vintage with the other winemakers and tasting.
Wonderful. Thanks, Russell. It's so much history with this group. This is incredible. Thanks again for sharing. And last but very not least, we've got Joe Wright with Left Coast Estate. This is lot number 12. Joe, I'd love to hear about you and Left Coast and what makes your auction lot so freaking good.
Thanks, Ian. Hey, everybody. Good to see you all and good to be seen. My name is Joe Wright. I'm the winemaker and wine grower at Left Coast Estate. We're a 400-acre estate here in the heart of the Van Duzer corridor in the Willamette Valley. Like some of y'all have mentioned already, but everything we grow, in essence, we bottle. Everything we bottle, we grow. We are presenting our auction wine as it's called Ensemble. It's defined as a group of items viewed as a whole rather than individually. This is a departure from what we typically do. The ingredients for this blend are typically individually bottled as vineyard designates, and for the auction lot, we pull just small percentages of each and blend them. The only other wine we do that with is our estate blend, our Pinot Noir. So as far as all of our high-end wines, they're very vindictive of their place of origin, the site where they're grown. So it's been a great opportunity. You know, it pushes you to blend or to put together something you wouldn't have otherwise. So that's our wine ensemble. What makes these unique? We're a 400-acre estate. We've got, but really five really individual and distinct and unique wine growing areas on the estate, defined by soil depth aspects, row orientations, elevations, and so on. About 50% of this blend is put together by a vineyard we call Truffle Hill. It's adjacent to a hazelnut grove that we are attempting to cultivate truffles under. This site's unique. We're again in the Van Duzer corridor, but this vineyard site sits at about 350 feet. It's kind of high and dry aspect. It's surrounded by oak savanna and just doesn't get pounded by the winds and the other parts of the vineyard that this blend comes from. And as a result, the wines are very perfumed and elegant and comparably. About 25% of the blend comes from our latitude 45 block, which the parallel runs through. And this is a slightly lower elevation. It's between about 230 and 280 feet in elevation. And it typically gives us this beautiful brambly fruit composition. It's just always this nice mix of red and blue fruit, very spicy, very peppery. And just above it, the other 25% of the blend comes from our right bank, which is all pomard based. And these are our shallowest soils. It's a true south aspect. It sits between 350 and 400 feet and just gets pounded by the wind. So we've got low water holding capacity, shallow soils, heavy winds, south facing, very concentrated, very textured, very, tannic. We're always managing tannins in the vineyard and the winery every year. In fact, let's see. It is right there. So,
Well done.
It's a vineyard map.
Let's see. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah,
Joe, just
go ahead.
as long as I've got you here too, 2019, I think it was a lovely year. Josh said it's his favorite. I know a little rain to contend with, lots of acidity, very pretty wines, very, I think, long-lived wines. In your opinion, is there another vintage that we've had in Oregon that you can say that's similar to 2019? And I guess this question goes for all of you. If you had to compare it to another vintage people are familiar with, where would you go?
When I got to Oregon in '96, that was my first vintage. So not too far out from some previous vintages that kind of actually got me to move out here. So one of my favorite vintages was '91. I didn't make it. I had nothing to do with the growing season, but that was what just sparked my curiosity and interest in this growing region. And so I'm thinking, and having talked about that vintage with winemakers that have made it, that it's similar in my, maybe you guys, I moved in '96. I just remember a lot of rain. I think that it was a cool rainy vintage. The contrast, I think that, God, if we could make '96s and '97s over again, we could do such a better job today. And maybe this, maybe 19 was that, it was a do-over, and we've learned so much in the last couple decades. But in more recent memory, I'd say like 05, 10, 19, my absolute favorite vintages. And Josh, yes, 19, I just loved it. It was cool. It was rainy towards the end, a very mild, uneventful season from bud break on. But we just got the hang time, we got the low sugars, the low alcohols, and the physiological and phenological ripeness. The wines are concentrated and dark in color, yet it rained and it was cool. The flavors and aromas, the wines are going to have longevity. It's been a great vintage. I like I think I make wine better with a heavier load on my back, kind of like a semi truck going down the highway. It's just a little smoother if it's got a heavier load, and 19 was that.
Wonderful. Great, thank you. That's a fantastic response. In 1991, I have to look into the library and try to get my hands on some of those. What about the rest of you? Is there anything that stood out in 2019 that made you reminisce or pull out your tool set from a different vintage?
So our first vintage was 2011, and that was a somewhat cool vintage. It was actually, I've been tracking the weather on our vineyard for 15 years, and 2011 was 90% of normal over that 15-year period of time. And actually, 2019 was also 90% of normal. The difference was in 2019, we had warmer than normal May and June, and then it cooled off for July, August, and September. And then it really, that couple inches of rain we had that first week of September really slowed things down. So we really finished off that last 2 or 3 weeks prior to harvest with those nice cool days, those big diurnal shifts between day and night. So I would actually say these are even better than the 2011s. You know, it was comparable in the overall coolness, where the difference was 2011 ended with a bang. September was warmer than normal, where in 2019, we ended with a nice cool finish, which is what we want.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, and 2019 to me seemed like the clusters were a little smaller. You know, there wasn't as, like, the cluster morphology wasn't really large like it was in 11. So I feel like there's a little bit more maybe magnification in 2019.
Yeah, and 11 was like a mid-October harvest. You know, it was super late. It was, you know, on 11 we had a nice summer, but it was only like 3 weeks long. You know, 19, yeah, I mean, the obvious comparison I think would be to recent vintages would be 2013 in terms of the amount of rain during September. But I think that the 2019 wines have some magic that is puts them, in my estimation, way above what we got in 2013. There was certainly, you know, the fruit got a little beat up, but I remember my harvest notes say what was good was really, really, really good. And after we eliminated 5-10% on the sorting line, what we had left was phenomenal. So I'm a big fan of the vintage as well.
Fantastic. Russell or Josh, what do you guys think?
You know, in terms of the taste of the wine, I kind of go back to the 2010 to me more than the 2011. It's got that real, it kind of sings to me and really lasts. And we've still got some of the 2010s, you know, in the cellar that we get out every 6 or months or a year and taste. And so to me, this wine has a lot of resemblance to that. And one of our very first vintages was 98, but in 99, to me, this wine has a lot of similarities to that 99 vintage. And in terms of its potential to live a long time, I see a lot of parallels between this and the 99. So maybe there's something about nines going on here.
Lovely.
Yeah, 99 was, I mean, the wines are similar, but the vintages were almost the exact opposite, in that 99 was a cloudy, crummy summer and then a miraculous fall, whereas 2019 was a miraculous summer and a crummy fall. So I mean, it was the opposites. But what made 2019 special in my mind to the 2010 paradigm is we lost all degree days around the 3rd week in September for the rest of the year in 2019. And what that meant was we didn't get any more alcohol or sugar development. We did get hang time and development. And so the wines are low in alcohol, but extremely floral and elegant. And I think this is one of the most floral vintages since 2010 or 99 at lower alcohol levels and high natural acidities. And, you know, it was probably 2019 probably put some gray hairs on some people, but I think people who've been making wine in Oregon long enough, like this panel, was actually relishing this opportunity. We knew when it happened that we were going to make good wine, and it wasn't without its challenges for sure. But, you know, I think it's really important to say that, you know, we all get the emails from customers or the trade saying, you know, hey, I heard it rained. Are you guys okay? You know, and I think that we have to remember that it rains in Oregon all the time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're used to it. And Pinot Noir and Chardonnay do not need the heat and the sunshine that, Mediterranean style varietals need. In fact, what we just need is time on vine and sunlight, which we get an abundance of in our Willamette Valley summertime up here north of the 45th parallel. So I think that, it's quite normal to see 1, 2, 3, 4 rain events and still call it a great vintage. And I remember visiting Burgundy in 2002, and we took the month of August as a vacation because my wife, Caroline, is from Burgundy. It's where we studied. We wanted to go back and be with our friends, and it rained every single day that we were there. Every single day for 30 days it rained, and every single winery we visited was like, this is the vintage of the decade. And you know what? The O2s were fantastic. And Pinot Noir and Chardonnay have this, kind of survival mechanism and don't need that heat. And 2019 is a great example of that. These are going to be wines that are talked about for a long time.
Wonderful. That's awesome. Well, I had a question for you guys. It's something I think I see as a winemaker in the Valley, you learn a lot each year. You have one shot to do it. And sometimes it can be a little stressful, depending on what Mother Nature throws at you. But, I think it goes into everything. It goes into selling. It goes into, how you build your brand. And if you could tell yourself one piece of advice for the young you that was getting into the wine industry, with all that now, what would it be? If you could be like, hey, you should make 100% old cluster wines in 25 years because they're awesome. Or I don't know. I'm curious to see what's the biggest thing you've learned, or what's the biggest thing you want to tell yourself that you never would have thought of?
I'll speak to that first. It's quite simply less is more. In the vineyard, in the wine, grow good grapes, just usher them through the cellar, with intention, and stop fiddling around with stuff in the winery.
That's awesome.
Don't lose course. Of course, make great wine, but it all starts in the vineyard, obviously.
So you focus more on farming and viticulture the more you get into things. You'd say probably, Joe?
More and more every vintage, absolutely. Yeah.
Fantastic. What about these other seasoned pros?
Yeah, that's a big question, obviously, but I would say act fast in the vineyard and act very slowly in the winery. When you have to be around harvest time, to be very attuned to the hourly forecast of what's coming at you, and you check it every time that forecast is going to change, because you got to be ready to pull the trigger and go when it's time to go. In terms of getting the harvest in the winery, never do anything based on one tasting.
Right.
If you taste the wines and they're terrible and you're freaking out, go have a beer, go out to dinner, come back a week later and try again before you do anything.
That's great. I'm secretly asking all you guys these questions so I can actually learn something.
I'll throw one out. I'd say don't argue with your dad so much. He's a pretty smart guy.
Gosh, that's for you.
No, I don't argue with my dad. I get it. I mean, Russ, your comment hits home. Absolutely. I would just add that, being a young kid, young people want to try really hard and want to, make impressions and make waves and create recognition. And it's impossible to tell, my son is 20 years old and he's just outside this door cleaning tanks right now. And he's worked the last few harvests. And if I was to tell him hey, like Joe just said, think about it in a minimalist way. Don't think about all these things. Just think about this one true thing. At 20 years old, you don't understand that. It's very difficult. And you want to sometimes be everything to everybody. You want to bend over backwards till you break. You want to be the next great thing, whatever it is. But I think that many of us on this call can agree Joe's point that for me, personally, minimalism as I've gotten older is the one true path in winemaking.
Fantastic. That is wonderful. Mike, what about yourself?
I spend a lot of time in the vineyard, and as a result, I've spent a lot of time fretting and worrying. You know, sometimes the clusters are bigger than I thought they should be. Sometimes I thought they were smarter. And this year, you're seeing a lot of hens and chicks. And every time I'm thinking, oh man, the thing I've learned is just relax. Each vintage is unique, and they all come out wonderful.
That's awesome. Well, in 2019, I mean, this lot that we've all put together, Josh, I heard you say something about whole cluster earlier. I know that you do a lot of work with whole cluster. I'm a big fan myself, and a lot of my peers are not. I think one of the questions I get a lot is, do you change your approach depending on the vintage with whole cluster? And this is for all you guys. Like, any of you guys play around with whole cluster here?
Sure. Yeah, but it is vintage to vintage. We've got a couple SKUs where we can basically capture something unique and distinct every year, and it doesn't have to be consistent. So yeah, in a year that's suitable, that's definitely a go-to.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we destemmed for many, many years. In 2014, we started slowly reintroducing a little whole cluster. We're up to probably about 15-20% now in most wines. I like the added aromatic complexity and another class of tannins that it brings.
Lovely.
Russ?
For us, our use of whole cluster is kind of in tandem with our reduction in punch downs, and so we're trying to get a slightly different structure from the wine. So I like the spice that we get from using the whole cluster fruit, but we're also really trying to be really gentle with our cap management, and so really almost eliminating the punch downs in favor of a real gentle pump over mixing of the wine, so that we're getting all the really kind of the rich mouth filling tannins, but none of the bitterness, none of the astringency that can come with that. So that for me, the two go together in our winery.
Wonderful.
Mike, do you guys do whole cluster?
Don't. I mean, again, I said earlier, we're Yamhill Carlton, and with Yamhill Carlton, we tend to have a lot of tannins naturally, and we're in a warmer spot of Yamhill Carlton. Even though we're at 700 plus feet, we have a gorge wind that comes right over the vineyard, and so we tend to be warmer than just about anywhere else in Yamhill Carlton. So we may need to start experimenting, but right now we don't do any whole cluster.
Yeah, I mean, Ian, to your point, for me, whole cluster was always growing up as a kid in tasting wines, and Brian and I in the early days, because I made my first couple of vintages in close proximity to Brian's place, and we tasted a lot of wines together. And there's something about whole cluster for me that was always 1 + 1 = 3. There was just this something that I loved, and that's a very personal and subjective experience, and it's something that I wanted in my wines. I also was very influenced by some of the wines of the Northern Rhone, especially the wines of Domaine Klopp and Cornas, where they're routinely able to make wines in the 14s or low 15s in alcohol, and yet have freshness and saltiness and age-worthiness. And every time I asked European domains, why are your wines age so well? Why do they have this saltiness? Whole cluster or stem inclusion always came back as the answer. And so at a young age, I started experimenting with it. And then we just recently, in the last decade, started going as much whole cluster as possible in an effort to, again, try to capture more savoriness, more salinity, more umami in the wines, not just be fresh and fruity. And it's something that I enjoy, and I think is it works very well in the Willamette Valley. And I think that to Russell's point and to Brian's point and Joe's point, your fermentation style has to change a little bit when you do whole cluster. It can't be as much pigeage or hand punch downs. It's got to be a little bit less extractive, and thus including more of this element of carbonic maceration and more aromatics and textures and mouthfeels. So it's something that works for us and we love. And also I think it's because of our farming that we are seeing a lignification of green materials on the plants, whether it's seeds or shoots or stem peduncles, that is more conducive to doing that style of ferments. If not, if we were just getting a lot of outrageous green pyrazines and bell peppers and wines that smelled like mowing the front lawn, we wouldn't do it. But our appellations and our vineyards are conducive to this style, and it's something that we're pushing forward with.
That's great. Well, this is fun. It's fun to try all these different types of winemaking too. Of course, I love to talk about what goes into the wine because this is my happy place. And I feel like there's a lot of different ways you can extract and experiment. So I think it sort of adds to the complexity and uniqueness of these lots. And Julia, you have some fantastic questions, and I've been asking a lot, but I love how your brain works. And I know that you've been fielding questions from the audience.
We have gotten a couple nice audience questions.
Great.
I have one about ageability here that I think is pretty insightful. This guest says, I usually think that wines like cabs need to lay down longer than Pinot before we open them. I tend to open most Pinot in the 5 to 6 years after vintage range. Is there a better rule of thumb? I think it's tough by vintage, but generally longer than that. What do you guys think?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that was kind of Bert Williams' old 6-year golden rule. I think it depends on intention. It depends on vintage to a certain degree. We make some wines that are more intended for early consumption, and we make the State Reserve, of which this is kind of a uber version, is intended for long aging. Even with young vines, we just opened a 2001 the other night of our State Reserve, including these grapes, and the wine was fresh and vibrant and probably could go another 20 years.
I actually have a follow-up question to that. I am curious, and this is for anybody who wants to answer, but when you are making a wine for age worthiness, Brian alluded to the fact that there's things you can do that are choices. To what extent is it just also, as a wine develops in the cellar, discovering that it has ageability? And for you, of tannin, acidity, phenolic ripeness, alcohol, all of these kind of players, who's the MVP for long-term aging?
It's really length on the palate. When we're selecting individual barrels from the best blocks for the reserve wines, we spit it out and we start counting. And if we get up to 30 and you can still taste the wine, then that's a candidate for the reserve.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Josh.
You can't force age worthiness on a wine. I think that's something we've all probably recognized, is trying to make an age-worthy wine is sometimes like trying to put the square peg in the round hole, right? So there are vineyards that are age-worthy, and there are blocks or clonal or vintages that are age-worthy, but I don't think you can force age-worthiness on a wine. It just presents itself. And I think that it really doesn't present itself until at least probably, I mean, for me, after malolactic, you get a good idea, but it's probably not until 2 or 3 years after bottling that you get the best impression of where it's going to go.
And then putting this auction lot together too, something I like asking people: are you focused more on ageability or approachability? I know you need both to kind of make that wine a hit, but I think if you had to bend one way or the other, which way would you go?
Well,
Oh, go ahead, Brian.
yeah, I mean, this is the material that goes on our State Reserve, so it's really all about ageability. The accessibility will come with the vintage. The 19, I don't necessarily think as the most forward approachable vintage, but it's not really tight and closed down either. I'm tasting this wine now for the first time since we bottled it about 6 weeks ago, and I'd take it home and drink it tonight. But I think if I had a couple of bottles, I'd keep them at least 10 years.
Wonderful.
I was going to mention just when putting this blend together, it's just about, just a multi-dimensionality. It's, I love texture. I love length. And somehow it just all manifests when you're going through your barrels and you know how that blend's going to come together. But yeah, just I love texture always. And I think that ultimately lends to longevity. Certainly, if there's structure, there's tension, and certainly like in the 19 vintage, inherent acidity. I mean, there's a chemistry for sure. But yeah, I was gonna say too, though, like I just think that wines, if well made, I mean, there's the great agers, and then there's the agers. If they're well made, I mean, I've still got cases of O2s. It was a good vintage, but they're not. You open them, they're beautiful. There's perfume, there's fruit. Are they the great ones? Maybe not, but one of my favorite stories of a quick story on an old wine that's probably still on the shelf today for like, I don't know, $7.99 was a 1970 bottle of Bolla Valpolicella. And I just happened to come through my cellar. I opened it up and it was wonderful. It didn't fall apart within the 30 minutes anyway. So I just think that, really well-made wines, if cared for in the vineyard, if cared for in the winery, and if cellared thereafter correctly, all wine ages beautifully. It has that potential.
I love it.
Yeah, and there's kind of there's this catch-22 with aging wines, right? It's like, it's kind of the old Burgundian paradigm of you go back to a domain and you go, hey, I opened up a 20-year-old bottle and it wasn't any good. And they go, well, you aged it too long. Or, you go back to the domain and go, I opened up this 10-year-old bottle. And, oh, you opened it too early. It's impossible to find the perfect time to drink wine. And I think it's a pitfall, or it's quicksand. The question from consumers of when should we drink your wine, and you should drink wine when you want to drink the wine. Wine is pleasurable, and as a winemaker, I think we drink a lot of young wine because that's what we learn the most from. It's really hard to learn from a 30-year-old bottle of wine. A 30-year-old bottle of wine is pure pleasure. It's just this wonderful, rare, hedonistic experience. But as a winemaker, we can open a bottle that's 2-3 years old and actually decipher technique or think about what they might have done or oak usage or whatever. So, when to drink wine, I personally drink most wines young because I'm still trying to figure things out. But like Joe was saying, those rare bottles that you can open that have aged so beautifully, that's what we're in it for, right?
Yeah.
I would agree that like searching for the optimum time is kind of missing the pleasure and the point of aging wine. Wine, it's just always changing, and watching that journey is really part of the pleasure. And what I like to recommend to people, if you buy a case of wine, you can open one bottle a year, and then you're going to watch that. You're going to watch that progression. And maybe once you get, partway through, you're going to say, oh, this keeps getting better. I want to, keep it longer than that. But I'd like to think more of the progression than the pinpoint, peak pleasure.
I love it.
What
Mike, I see you. I see you have your wine there too as well. Is your wine relatively friendly now, or do you think it's going to age really well? I'm curious, Mike.
I think this is going to age well. I'm thinking back to your earlier question, what type of style do we go for the auction wine? And we kind of moved 180 degrees this year because we've typically gone from the warmer side of our vineyard, focusing on more the 115 Badensville, big dark cherry, blackberry. Where this year we turned it around and we did an elegant lady that's very persistent in character. And perhaps she won't age as long as some of those, bigger, wines, but I'm sure it's going to be fine for 20 years plus, probably 30, even as an elegant wine that focuses more on the 777 and the 114 clones. But the thing I enjoy doing is I like to talk to our folks in the tasting room and say, which of the wines is singing this month? Because it seems like they all, they're alive in the bottle, and sometimes they'll say, oh, go for the Kinney, which is one of the matriarchs, or they'll come in and they'll say, oh boy, that Sullivan's really singing, and it's just, I don't know if it's the astrological signs, but the key to all this is you got to buy a bunch of cases of this so you can try it at different times.
Here.
Yes, you do.
Ian, one more question here, and this is from someone just speaking for people not from the Pacific Northwest, not familiar with the Pacific Northwest, perhaps. The main difference between this area and California, that is such a big question. We could probably take all of preview week to discuss it. So perhaps through the lens of Pinot, and in terms of what you're finding in your glass today, maybe the biggest thing that jumps out to you that says to you Willamette Valley, as opposed to California, if you were in a flight where there was one ringer and several California Pinots.
I would just start off by saying the main difference between Oregon and California is about 14 hours in a car.
600 miles.
Yeah. We're very far north. We're most of our brands are above the 45th parallel in the Willamette Valley. It's a completely different climate altogether. A lot of people think of Washington and California as larger, structured, bigger varietals, and Oregon is a real conundrum of lighter, elegant, acid-based varietals in the middle. And so I think our maritime climate means that our wines are not going to be necessarily higher in alcohol, boozy in character, darker in color. They're going to be, I think, much more this, for me, the Willamette Valley wines, and I don't know what you guys think, but I mean, for me, the Willamette Valley is just like when we eat our strawberries or our cherries or our blackberries. It's this amazing balance between succulent, juicy, natural acidities and texture and just fresh flavor. And I think if you like wines that make your mouth salivate and want you to eat food, then the Willamette Valley is the place to go on the West Coast.
Fantastic. Would anybody else like to talk about any large differences they see or similarities to anywhere in California in the group here? No, I think Josh, I think you nailed it.
I just pissed off all the Californians on the call. Is that what I did?
Well, and to Pinot Noir in California, just the plain devil's advocate. California is a very large state, and there's the Santa Cruz Mountains, there's the northern end of it, there's the west side, there's there's all these different high elevation maritime influence and maritime influenced areas there too. So kind of a just a more bigger question. It'd be interesting to know specifically where in California if we could compare to, but a lot of different flavors coming out of that state for sure.
Joe has a great point, because we're actually talking about the Willamette Valley. We're not talking about Oregon in general, and Oregon has a lot of different appellations as well. So to say California is kind of a Pandora's box. We need to know where.
Yeah, to be fair, I took some liberties with that question that came through to the panelists. The person said this area, so I went with the Willamette Valley, but Oregon's a big state with quite a bit of different climates.
Fantastic. Well, Julia, are there any other questions coming in?
I think that's it. I wanted to thank everybody. What a wonderful panel. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Ian.
Yeah, you bet. This is a lot of fun. It's moments like these that I think change the way we think about wine and the way we make wine. And I hope that everybody that attended today has a better idea of who we all are and how rocking these auction lots are. So get in there, and we hope to see you next week.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Everybody.
Thanks for everybody.
Cheers.
Thank
Great
you,
to-
folks, and we'll see you August 5th, virtually or in person. And if you want to check out the rest of the preview week schedule, I popped in the chat once again, but take care, and we'll see you next week.